The chandeliers of the Waldorf Astoria glittered like constellations trapped in crystal. Their fractured light spilled across sequin gowns, polished shoes, and champagne flutes raised like trophies. The air hummed with wealth, power, and secrets whispered beneath laughter. This was the annual charity gala, an event where fortunes weren't just flaunted, they were measured like weapons. In that vast ballroom, where the collective net worth could rival nations, one woman reigned without contest. At 42, she wasn't just a businesswoman. She was a force of nature wrapped in silk. Her dark blonde hair shimmered under the lights, perfectly coiffed to cascade against her bare shoulders. A sapphire gown clung to her with regal precision, its color matching the unyielding steel of her eyes. People didn't just notice Vivian. They braced for her. She raised her champagne flute, taken without so much as a glance at the hand that served it, and turned her attention toward Harrison Cole, a billionaire investor whose whispers could shift markets overnight. The Asian sectors are undervalued, Vivian said, her voice smooth, deliberate, every syllable sharpened like a blade. We'll double our stake before next quarter. Her words carried. She spoke like a woman who had never failed, never faltered, never let the world glimpse the cracks behind her empire. But then, a throat cleared. Softly, almost apologetically, her eyes flicked down at last. The man with the silver tray was tall, broad-shouldered, his dark hair a little too unruly for the immaculate setting. But it wasn't his stature that caught her. It was his eyes, storm gray with flecks of blue, that seemed to cut straight through her armor. More champagne, Ms. Lancaster? His tone was calm, low, refined, almost noble. It startled her. A server's words should have been deferential, forgettable. His weren't. They carried something else. Not servitude, not reverence, but challenge. Vivian narrowed her gaze, her smile cold as diamonds. You've been watching me all evening. That's inappropriate for the help, don't you think? Her voice sliced the air, drawing nearby ears without them even realizing why. The man didn't flinch, didn't lower his eyes. Instead, he offered a faint smile, as if amused. Observing is part of good service, ma'am. Though I admit it's hard not to notice someone working so hard to be noticed. The words hit like a slap. Harrison Cole choked slightly on his drink. A murmur passed through those close enough to overhear. Vivian's cheeks warmed, an alien sensation. She hadn't blushed in decades. No one dared speak to her like this. No one. Her voice dropped, dangerous, the kind of quiet that precedes storms. You do realize I could have you fired with a single word? He set the tray down on a nearby table, straightened to his full height, 6'1", broad, immovable. My daughter's school tuition doesn't care whose name signs my paycheck, but she might care if I taught her that wealth permits cruelty. The ballroom seemed to freeze. Her perfectly manicured hand tightened on the flute until the glass nearly cracked. A single father, she said, her words dripping condescension. How predictably sentimental. Tell me, does serving caviar to the powerful ease your financial struggles? But his gaze didn't break. If anything, it deepened, steady as stone. I've served presidents and prisoners, Ms. Lancaster, and I've learned that character is never measured by net worth, only by how you treat those who can give you nothing. Silence, not absence of sound. Silence that pressed down like a weight, the kind that made you suddenly aware of every breath, every stare. For the first time in years, Vivian felt naked, seen, not as the queen of couture, not as the empire builder, but as a woman brittle behind her glass walls. The man inclined his head politely. Adrian Hayes, he said simply, offering his name like a final chess move. I'll be serving your table tonight. I recommend the salmon. And then he walked away. Vivian remained still, her mask of composure trembling. Anger flared hot in her chest. Curiosity tangled with it, like a thorn twisting deeper. For the first time in a long, someone had left her speechless. And worse, someone wearing a server's uniform. But while Vivian nursed her wounded pride in a penthouse of glass and silence, Adrian Hayes returned home to a 2-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn, where a little girl with honey-brown curls waited for the only thing money could never buy: love. Across the East River, the glitter of Manhattan faded into something quieter, humbler. Brooklyn streets buzzed not with champagne laughter, but with the hum of tired cars, the bark of corner store radios, and the scent of fried food escaping open windows. In a modest two-bedroom apartment, Adrian Hayes eased the blanket up around his daughter's small shoulders. "Again, Daddy," she whispered, fighting the heaviness in her eyes. 7 years old, curls like spun honey framing her face, and clutching a threadbare stuffed elephant whose seams had long since surrendered. Adrian chuckled softly. The sound was warm, carrying none of the fatigue etched into the lines around his eyes. "Again? Rosie, I've told this story 100 times." She pouted, stubborn. "But it's my favorite." With a sigh, he sat at the edge of her bed. The springs squeaked under his weight. For a moment, he was no longer the weary server who carried trays for the rich. He was a storyteller, soldier turned father, weaving courage into words. "Once," he began, his voice dropping into that deep, steady cadence she loved, "there was a soldier who promised his friends they'd meet again under the big oak tree they used to play beneath as kids. He swore they'd all come home together." Her eyes blinked slowly, fighting sleep. But they didn't come home. The words were soft, almost too heavy for a child's lips. Adrian's gaze clouded. Shadows flickered across his face. But he nodded. Some of them became stars in the sky instead. Bright ones. The kind you can always find, even on the darkest nights. Rosie clutched his hand. "So, the soldier, he promised to live for them, right? To live good enough for all of them." His throat tightened. He brushed a curl from her forehead, his touch tender. "That's right, sweetheart. And that soldier, he keeps his promises." Her small smile was enough to crack through the armor he wore each day. "Is that why you work so much, Daddy? For the stars?" The question pierced him, a blade wrapped in innocence. He kissed her forehead, whispering the truth he could never escape. "No, Rosie. I work because I have the best reason in the world. You." She drifted into sleep, her breath soft, even and trusting. Adrian lingered by her side, watching the rise and fall of her chest. Then, with a heavy sigh, he slipped into the kitchen. The room was cluttered with unpaid bills, textbooks, and a single flickering light bulb that hummed like an old friend. The world thought him invisible, a server in a borrowed tux, a shadow in crowded rooms. But at that kitchen table, bent over pages of accounting theory and late-night coffee stains, he was fighting for something far greater than himself. 3 jobs, sleepless nights, tuition for night school, and still, the inhaler that kept Rosie breathing cost $200 a month. Each prescription, a reminder of battles money couldn't win. He ran a hand through his unruly hair, weary but resolute, because for her he would never quit. Meanwhile, high above Central Park, in a penthouse where glass walls framed the glittering city like a painting, Vivian Lancaster removed her diamond earrings with mechanical precision. Her empire stretched across continents. Lancaster Couture, a name synonymous with luxury, ambition, and perfection. Net worth, over $2 billion. Magazine covers, countless. Power unmatched. And yet silence. The kind of silence that echoes in high ceilings and empty hallways. Vivian set the earrings in their velvet box, poured herself a glass of Bordeaux older than most of her competitors, and unfolded a stack of quarterly reports. Numbers, graphs, expansion projections. More, always more. The board wanted aggressive growth. Investors wanted bolder risks. Her assistant wanted confirmation for tomorrow's charity auction. The press wanted a soundbite. Everyone wanted something. She sipped the wine, its richness coating her tongue, and caught her reflection in the window. Beautiful, poised, untouchable, and yet her eyes betrayed her. Cold, tired, lonely. She whispered the thought aloud, as though the empty room were her only confidant. When did living turn into performing? Her phone buzzed. A text from her assistant. Final confirmation for tomorrow. Press in attendance. Another event. Another mask. Another night where her presence would be both spectacle and shield. But tonight, something different lingered. A voice. Calm. Defiant. Character isn't measured by net worth, but by how you treat those who can offer you nothing. Adrian's words circled her mind, refusing to be swatted away. Ridiculous. He was just a server, a nobody, and yet his eyes had seen through her walls as though they were glass. For the first time in years, Vivian Lancaster felt the faintest crack in her armor. At tomorrow's art auction, their worlds would collide again. But this time, it wouldn't just be sharp words over champagne. It would be an invitation into danger, opportunity, and something neither of them expected. A test of how far pride could bend before it broke. The Metropolitan Museum of Art pulsed with anticipation. Beneath its domed ceilings and gilded arches, New York's elite gathered like jeweled birds in a golden cage. Flashbulbs flickered. The scent of roses mingled with champagne. Laughter rose and fell like music, covering the quiet hum of ambition. Tonight's prize was more than art, it was influence. And influence was currency in the city. Vivian Lancaster moved through the crowd in a crimson gown that clung like flame. Heads turned instinctively. Conversations paused mid-sentence. Every step she took was deliberate, commanding, calculated. Lancaster Couture had poured millions into sponsoring this gala. Investors waited for her attention. Journalists poised their pens. Every glance, every smile, every word she offered would ripple through tomorrow's headlines. And she was ready. Or so she believed. Across the room, invisible to most, Adrian Hayes adjusted the collar of his server's uniform. The bow tie felt suffocating, but he bore it with quiet dignity. This job mattered. Tonight's tips could cover Rosie's asthma treatments for the month. He balanced a tray of hors d'oeuvres, weaving between gowns worth more than his entire apartment. His movements were precise, practiced, a ghost among the living, until the auction began. The auctioneer's voice rang out, dramatic and theatrical. We begin tonight with a newly discovered piece, attributed to the great Jean-Michel Basquiat. Gasps rippled. Paddles shot up. The numbers leapt into millions with dizzying speed. At the refreshment table, Harrison Cole leaned closer to study the piece, brows furrowed. Curious strokes, he muttered. And then another voice, quiet, certain, cutting through the chaos like a scalpel. The brushwork doesn't align with his 1983 period. See here, the hesitation in the lower left corner. By then, his work was sharper, defiant. This lacks conviction. Harrison turned, startled. The words hadn't come from a curator or an art dealer. They had come from a man holding a tray of champagne. Adrian, you know Basquiat? Harrison asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. Adrian offered a faint smile, his eyes never leaving the painting. Art history was my minor, before the military. Basquiat's evolution reflects a struggle with identity, a rebellion against invisibility. Worth studying, worth remembering. For a moment, Harrison simply stared. A billionaire suddenly intrigued by a server. He wasted carrying glasses, Harrison murmured. Adrian's jaw tightened, but his tone carried quiet pride. Service has dignity, sir, and it pays the bills while I finish my degree. The air shifted before either man noticed her approach. Vivian. Her voice cut into the conversation like ice cracking under pressure. How fascinating. A server who critiques million-dollar paintings. Perhaps you'd like to place a bid. Her smile was sharp, her eyes glinting with disdain. But beneath that, something else flickered. Curiosity. Adrian turned his storm-gray gaze on her. Calm, unshaken. I prefer investments with more tangible returns, Ms. Lancaster, like my daughter's education. Harrison laughed softly, charmed by the unexpected defiance. You should hear his analysis, Vivian. Quite impressive. Her mask faltered for half a heartbeat, then returned, polished and cold. Indeed, she said, voice smooth as silk. And what else do you know, mister? Hayes, he replied, his tone steady. He knew she remembered. Adrian Hayes. For the first time in years, Vivian found herself unsettled. He wasn't intimidated by her wealth, her power, or her cutting words. He met her as an equal, no, as something worse, as someone who saw through her. And in that discomfort, an idea sparked. She needed someone. The Lumiere Group, French luxury royalty, awaited her in Los Angeles for delicate negotiations. Her translator had withdrawn at the last moment. The deal was worth billions. Billions that couldn't be left in the hands of strangers. Adrian's voice replayed in her mind, fluent, calm, unafraid. Tell me, she asked suddenly, her words surprising even herself. Do you speak French, Mr. Hayes? His brow furrowed, suspicious. Fluently. 5 years, stationed near the French-German border. Decision struck her like lightning. Swift, ruthless. Empire building. My office. Tomorrow morning at 9. I have a proposition you may find compelling. Her heels clicked against the marble as she strode away, her gown trailing like fire in her wake. Harrison chuckled, sipping his champagne. She's a piranha in designer heels. But she recognizes value when she sees it. Adrian exhaled slowly, watching her retreat. I'm not sure if that was a job offer or a threat. With Vivian Lancaster, Harrison mused, swirling his glass, it's usually both. Adrian would walk into Lancaster Couture the next morning with nothing but his dignity and a borrowed tie. He didn't yet know her offer would come with impossible conditions. Nor did Vivian know that this man, this nobody, would shatter the foundations of her carefully constructed empire. The lobby of Lancaster Couture gleamed with chrome and glass, its silence broken only by the faint hum of designer heels against marble. At precisely 9, Adrian Hayes sat waiting, his best shirt ironed within an inch of its life, the knot of his tie pulled too tight against his throat. Every detail in that lobby whispered wealth, the scent of polished leather, the faint trace of perfume that probably cost more than his rent. He did not belong, and yet he sat tall. When Vivian's assistant let him in, the office hit him like a battlefield. Floor-to-ceiling windows poured sunlight over steel and glass. Behind a desk that looked more like a throne than furniture stood Vivian Lancaster, her hair pulled into a severe knot, her charcoal suit cut like armor. She didn't offer him a seat. Mr. Hayes, she began without preamble, I need a French translator and cultural advisor for 3 days in Los Angeles. The negotiations involve a 9-figure licensing deal. Your compensation, she paused for effect. $15,000. Adrian's breath stilled. That money could pay months of medical bills, tuition, hope. But he kept his voice steady. Why me? Surely there are professionals. Because you challenge me, she cut in, eyes like razors. Which means you're either foolish or fearless. Either way, you won't crumble in front of French aristocrats. You understand art. You understand business. And you don't scare easily. She circled him like a general assessing a soldier. Consider it mutually beneficial. You need money. I need someone who won't faint at the sound of millions. Adrian's jaw tightened. There's one condition. My daughter comes with me. She's 7. Her caretaker is unavailable. Vivian's eyes hardened, her jaw clenching as though the word daughter itself offended her. This is a business trip, not a vacation. Then I decline. He rose, his dignity intact, though his chest ached at what he was giving up. My daughter comes first. Always. The silence that followed stretched, taut as wire. For once in her life, Vivian Lancaster tasted a word she rarely uttered. Fine, she said at last, her voice clipped. She stays at the hotel with a sitter. We leave tomorrow. Private terminal. 7 a.m., don't be late. At 37,000 feet, the private jet hummed like a beast purring. Vivian reviewed documents on her tablet, her eyes scanning projections worth billions. Across the aisle, Adrian's daughter sat quietly sketching, her curls spilling forward as she concentrated on the page. She's well behaved, Vivian observed stiffly, surprised by the child's quiet presence. Rosie's always been old for her age, Adrian replied, his voice low steady. The girl patted over, holding her drawing out like an offering. Miss Lancaster, I made this for you. Vivian froze. In the child's hands was a pencil sketch, startlingly detailed. Vivian hunched over her tablet, every line of concentration captured with unflinching honesty. For once, the Queen of Couture had no words. She accepted the paper awkwardly, fingers clumsy. Thank you, she managed. Rosie tilted her head. Daddy says you're very important. Do you like being the boss lady? Vivian hesitated. No boardroom, no investor, no rival had ever stumped her like this small voice. At last she admitted softly, it's challenging, but yes, I like creating beauty that makes people feel strong. Rosie nodded seriously, as though weighing the answer. Daddy says confidence is invisible armor. Do you wear it too? Vivian's throat tightened. She looked across at Adrian, his calm eyes watching, his expression unreadable. Your father, she said, is wiser than most men I know. The Chateau Marmont gleamed golden in the Los Angeles sun. In a private dining room, French executives from the Lumiere group sat with polished smiles and sharpened questions. Vivian spoke with elegance, her vision painted in confident strokes. Adrian translated flawlessly, weaving nuance and culture into every phrase. Together, they moved like a symphony, until Philippe Lumiere leaned forward, silver-haired and sharp-eyed. And what of your manufacturing capacities in Asia, Ms. Lancaster? Vivian froze. The data she'd received that morning was wrong, flawed. Her mask nearly cracked. And then Adrian stepped in, smooth, assured. Miss Lancaster was explaining earlier that while current capacity appears limited, a phased approach will allow exponential scaling by the third quarter, particularly with Malaysia. Philippe nodded approvingly, forward-thinking. Excellent. The deal pressed forward, seamless once more. But Vivian's eyes flicked to Adrian, sharp with suspicion. That night, under Los Angeles stars, the rooftop terrace was hushed. Adrian stood at the railing nursing a whiskey, the city sprawling beneath like constellations made of steel and neon. You lied, Vivian's voice cut through the night. The Malaysian facilities aren't ready. He didn't turn. I didn't lie. I gave you space to think 3 steps ahead. Philippe respects vision, not excuses. Her heels clicked closer. How does a server know about production capacities and corporate strategy? He turned, then eyes storm gray. The same way I knew you were reviewing backup documents in the car. I pay attention. It's what kept me alive in war zones and what keeps me alive now. Her chest tightened. You had no right to intervene. I was handling it. Were you? His voice stayed calm, but the challenge landed like a blow. Because for a moment, you looked terrified. Not of losing the deal, but of being seen as fallible. The words struck too close. Her composure cracked, raw anger and exhaustion spilling through. Do you have any idea what it takes to stand in those rooms as a woman? One mistake, one hint of weakness, and they tear me apart. No, Adrian admitted quietly, his honesty disarming. But I know what it's like to have people waiting for you to fail. The difference is you've built your walls, so no one can help when you actually need it. The silence that followed was heavier than any insult. The city glowed beneath them, but neither moved. At last she asked, almost against her will, why finance? Why not art? That's what lights your eyes when you speak. His jaw tightened. Shadows crossed his face. Because art doesn't pay for inhalers. Because my daughter comes first. Vivian turned toward him, and for the first time, she didn't see a server. She saw a man stripped by sacrifice, rebuilt by love, and the recognition unsettled her more than she cared to admit. But while the rooftop stripped them bare beneath the stars, danger waited in the glitter of Beverly Hills. There, amidst champagne and silk, Vivian would face a predator in her own world, and Adrian would reveal just how dangerous a man with nothing to lose could be. The Beverly Hills estate glowed like a palace carved from glass and gold. Music floated across marble floors. Diamonds caught the light like tiny suns. Beneath the glitter, conversations whispered of mergers, power, and money, all disguised as idle charm. Vivian Lancaster entered draped in midnight black silk, her platinum hair soft waves cascading over her shoulders. She moved like a queen among courtiers, every step a reminder of her dominion. Beside her, in a rented tuxedo that fit him as though made for him, stood Adrian Hayes. No tray in hand, no uniform to mark him as invisible. Tonight he walked as her translator, her shield, her equal. He stood taller than the chandeliers, his posture military, his eyes restless, always watching, always measuring. And though he hated these rooms of artifice, he endured them for her, for Rosie. Vivian, darling. The words slurred with champagne. Victor Eichmann, venture capitalist and vulture, staggered closer with a grin too wide. His hand landed heavy on her bare shoulder, fingers pressing into her skin. You're wasting your time with the French, he sneered, leaning in. Merge with Reichman Holdings. Together we'll own this city. Vivian's body went rigid. Remove your hand, Victor. My answer is no. But he tightened his grip, his smile curdling. Playing hard to get has cost you millions. Be smart for once. And then Adrian was there, quiet, sudden, like a shadow stepping into the light. His hand wrapped around Reichmann's wrist with controlled precision. No violence, just enough pressure to turn arrogance into discomfort. "Miss Lancaster has spoken," Adrian said, his voice quiet, lethal. Respect isn't optional. The room stilled. Reichmann's face flushed, rage and humiliation warring. "You'll regret this," he spat, yanking his hand free before stumbling into the night, watched by curious, judging eyes. Vivian exhaled slowly, her chest tight. For years, she'd fended off such men alone. She had crafted strategies, shields, masks. But no one had ever simply stood for her. "Thank you," she whispered, the words foreign on her tongue. "Though I could have handled it." Adrian's expression softened. "I know you could have, but sometimes even the strongest deserve someone in their corner." Later that night, Los Angeles wrapped itself in velvet darkness. On the hotel rooftop, Adrian leaned against the railing, a glass of whiskey catching the city lights. Vivian found him there, drawn as though by gravity. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked softly. "Never could," he replied without turning. Old soldier habits. They stood in silence, the city sprawling below like scattered stars. Finally, he asked, "Why did you really hire me? There are dozens of professionals." Her voice faltered, honest for once. "Because you weren't afraid of me. Everyone else either wants something from me or fears me. You just saw me." He turned, his storm gray eyes locking on hers. "And what did you see when you looked at me?" "At first, just a servant with too much confidence." She paused. "Now, I don't know. Something more." Silence stretched. Electric. Then his voice broke it, low-haunted. "I was a ranger. Special operations. 3 tours in Afghanistan. 2 in Iraq. I led 6 men. They'd have followed me anywhere." His hands gripped the railing until his knuckles whitened. "Bad intel. An ambush. I was the only one who came home." Vivian's breath caught. She heard the guilt in his voice, thick as blood. "For months I wished it had been me. Then I met Emma, Rosie's mother, a war correspondent. Brave, brilliant. She made me want to live again." His voice cracked. "She died, giving birth. They couldn't stop the bleeding." The rooftop blurred for Vivian as tears stung her eyes. Without thinking, she placed her hand over his. "I'm sorry." Adrian didn't pull away. "Everyone I've ever been responsible for is gone. Except Rosie. So yes, I serve drinks, I translate French, I scrape and claw. Because she's everything. She's all I have." Vivian's voice trembled, stripped of armor. "Then she's luckier than she'll ever know." And when he turned to face her, the air shifted. For the first time in years, Vivian Lancaster was not the hunter or the queen. She was simply a woman, standing on the edge of something terrifying and beautiful. But beauty has a cost. Back in New York, the fallout struck like a storm. Lancaster Couture's stock plummeted. The board circled like sharks, whispering of replacing her. The press painted her as unstable. For once, Vivian did not run, did not sharpen her smile into a blade. She stood in her penthouse with a glass of wine. The city spread below like a battlefield. And when Adrian knocked at her door, she let him in. "The board is voting tomorrow," he said, his voice steady. "I know," she answered almost calmly. "I cost them billions today." "No," he corrected. "You saved them from ruin. The SEC is already investigating Reichmann." He did the right thing. Their eyes met. No walls, no armor. Only 2 people, battle-worn, bruised, but unbroken. Times Square blazed with its usual chaos. Neon screamed. Screens flickered. Tourists gawked. But today, amidst the frenzy, a single message dominated the skyline. The Hayes Foundation for Veterans and Children, launching with a $200 million endowment. On the stage, Adrian Hayes stood tall, his daughter Rosie clutching his hand. At 40, he had stepped back into the light, not for power, but for purpose. "Second chances come in unexpected forms," he told the crowd, his voice carrying with quiet strength. 5 years ago, I thought I'd lost everything. But what I learned is this. Life strips you down to what matters. And what matters is not wealth, not power, but the love we give and the lives we choose to lift. The crowd erupted in applause. Rosie tugged his sleeve, whispering. Adrian smiled, nodded, and lifted her onto the podium. "My daddy says real superheroes don't wear capes," she said, her small voice ringing clear. "They wear invisible armor made of love, and sometimes they need someone to remind them they're still heroes, even when they're scared." The audience fell silent, hearts cracking open, and then from the front row, Vivian Lancaster rose. Her hair no longer an icy crown, but softened. Her eyes no longer shields, but windows. She joined them on stage. For once, the cameras caught not the ice queen of couture, but a woman transformed. Adrian turned to her, his hand finding hers. "You once asked what I had to offer," he said, his voice meant for her alone, though the world leaned in to listen. "Let me answer now. I offer you my strength when yours falters, my truth when yours is clouded, and my heart for as long as it beats." Tears blurred Vivian's vision. She had once measured life in billions. Tonight, she measured it in love. Their lips met under the blaze of neon, not as spectacle, but as truth. And in that moment, the city that devoured dreams bore witness to something it rarely saw. Two broken souls choosing to become whole. Rosie beamed, clutching her elephant tight. The family she had always dreamed of stood not in a mansion or boardroom, but in the light of Times Square, not through wealth, not through power, but through the harder, more beautiful work of love. What do you think matters more in life? The walls we build to protect ourselves, or the people we let in to break them down?